All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Tuesday. Hopefully, everybody's doing well. Um, Thank you for joining today's program. We have a special event today. As I introduce Mike, I just want everybody to know that this program is all about growing the strength of your talent, right? And we all know that since COVID, I know workforce development, retention has been at the top of the list. Every time I talk to members, it seems like they always struggle with keeping people, recruiting new people, basically how to go about developing your talent. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mike Goldman, who's a leadership team coach and author of Breakthrough Leadership Team, Performance Breakthrough, and now his new book, which launches today, congratulations, called The Strength of Talent. And I've known Mike now for my tenure here at CINJ. He's part of our CEO2 group. Great speaker. He's also a TEDx speaker and speaks internationally to groups and business leaders such as IBM, Allstate, Vistage, Women's Presidents Organization, Entrepreneurs Organization. He's been doing this 35 years, and he's worked with clients such as Disney, Verizon, Chanel, Ralph Lauren, very notable. And he's also host of the Better Leadership Team Show. So without further delay, welcome, Mike, and opening statements. Congratulations on the launch of the book. Wishing you success. And we're going to keep this very conversational, by the way, very informal, where I'll kind of throw out some questions to Mike, and then he'll talk about developing your talent. But welcome, Mike.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tony, for doing this. This has been about a 2-year journey of this book being my number one priority. So it's launch week is nice because I see the light at the end of the tunnel to focus on some other things as well. But really, really excited about the book and so happy for your support and the support of commerce and industry.
So what inspired you to write this book, Strength of Talent?
Well, I've been coaching and consulting for, as you said in the intro, 35 years. I've been working exclusively with leadership teams for about 20 years. And, what I have found is the biggest struggle that leaders have is a struggle of frustration with the team around them. I get calls all the time. What do I need to do to hold people accountable? Do I just need to fire everybody? What do I do? And, my last book, which I wrote in 2020 called Breakthrough Leadership Team, talked about the 6 pillars of building a great leadership team. And the 6th pillar focused on assessing performance, coaching, developing performance, and making the difficult decision to coach people out of the organization if they're not a fit. And while that book has resonated, all those pillars have resonated, and I coach on all 6 of the pillars. The one that leaders kept coming back to was this idea of how do we do a better job of assessing performance of our people, coaching people, developing people, making the tough decisions. What I found is in all my years, the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. It's not a new strategy. It's not a new technology. It's not a new market. Number one driver of profit growth is people growth. And what exists today are these traditional performance management techniques like annual performance reviews, which I believe is the annual performance reviews, the worst invention ever created in business. And for those thinking, well, that's why we do them quarterly, congrats, you do a crappy process 4 times a year. But traditional performance management, like annual performance reviews, performance improvement plans, they just don't work. Mercer did a study and found only 2% of leaders believe their performance management processes were adding exceptional value. And I looked at it and I said, if the number one driver of profit growth is people growth and performance management tools are not working, we need a better way. And that's what the book is all about. And that's what I've been working on with my clients for, over 10 years.
But let's kind of focus on what you just said, because all the companies that I talk to, small and large, they all do performance reviews on an annual basis. Some do it very adherent to KPIs, key performance indicators. Some set goals, some do the self-eval. Why don't you think they work? The self.
There are three three initial reasons. Is probably a dozen reasons why I believe they don't work, but the three biggies. One is, think about, so I'm a baseball fan. I'm a Yankee fan, and a very disappointed Yankee fan. But think about sports and imagine you are the manager of a baseball team, and you've got one of your players all year is in a slump, and you're seeing what they're doing wrong. They're in a slump. And at the end of the season, you say to them, hey, I've been watching you all year. I see what you're doing wrong. Let's talk about how to fix it for next year. Like, we wouldn't do that in Little League baseball. Why are we waiting for this magic point at the end of the year or the end of the quarter to have a conversation that we ought to be having continuously throughout the year? So that's number one. Number two is, there are two things that leaders tie very closely to the annual performance review that make the discussion very unproductive. One is, they give people a ranking. You go into an annual performance review or a quarterly performance review, and I say, Tony, you're a 3 out of 4 this year. And you thought you kicked ass and you should have been a 4 out of 4, and I gave you a 3 out of 4. You don't hear anything I say out of that after that, any constructive feedback, because you're defensive about the fact that you should have got a 4. And on top of that, there's something else leaders and companies tied to the annual performance review and the ranking, is a salary adjustment. Why am I fighting so much for a 4? I'm fighting for a 4 because I'm assuming it's impacting my raise, which you're about to give me either by letter or email or right after this conversation. So because they tie it to a ranking and to a dollar number, it becomes a very defensive conversation versus a conversation which is about, hey, how can I continue to improve? How can I continue to improve myself, move forward in my career, help this company? It becomes a very unproductive conversation.
So, okay, just what are the biggest mistakes that managers, leaders make in developing their people?
Well, one is the annual and quarterly performance review. The other, one of the biggest one, and this is kind of driven by the state of a lot of the traditional performance management tools. Leaders, and by the way, when I say leaders, I'm looking in the mirror too. I did this for many years. Leaders tend to overinvest in their low performers and underinvest in their high performers. Speaking of annual performance reviews, I could remember years ago when I worked for what is now called Accenture for many years, and Deloitte on the consulting side for many years. And I had to write these annual performance reviews. And for my worst performers, I had an easy time writing their annual performance review, because all I had to do was take the 18 things they were screwing up and narrow it down to the top 3 I wanted them to do something about, and give them some advice on how to fix that stuff. That was easy. But the folks I had working for me that were better and smarter than I were, what the heck am I going to tell them? Like, they're already doing a great job. And like, I didn't know what to do. So I would tend to do things like just, hey, keep up the good work. And what you realize, what we all should realize, is that your best people, if they don't grow with you, they will grow with someone else. We need to invest in our best people. And here's simple math. So simple math is, if you take a top performer, let's take sales because it's so easy to measure. You've got your top sales performer that's bringing in 100,000 in revenue, every month. If you work, coach, develop, challenge that top salesperson, and through that coaching and challenging, they improve their sales productivity by 20%. You just added $20,000 in revenue per month. They went from 100,000 to 120,000. Now you take one of your lower performers that may be bringing in $20,000 a month, and you work with them and they improve by 20%. They're bringing in another 4,000 a month, which is a bigger number. Like, invest where you can get more return. And here's the other way to think of investing in the wrong people is, and you can think about this even when, as an individual, investing in your strengths versus investing in your weaknesses. But if we think about it as a team, when you invest too much time in your lower performers and you neglect your high performers, like, just, you're doing a great job, keep going. If you work day in and day out with a low performing individual, either low performing because they're low in productivity, or maybe they're low performing because they're not a great culture fit. So it could be behavioral, or it could be more KPI driven. You work with them day in and day out. Typically, are you going to take a low performing individual and turn them into a high performing individual? I would love to say you can, and it happens all the time, but it doesn't. We're going to help them improve. They're going to go from low performing. If we do our job from low performing, they're going to start to approach something acceptable. We're going to coach them up to mediocre. Okay, that's better than low performing. But when we're doing that and ignoring our highest performing people, what happens to them? Well, number one, as I said before, they don't grow with you, they're going to grow with someone else. Some of them leave. Number two, if I'm being ignored and I see all of the attention of my leader is going to the lowest performers, I'm going to start to get stale. I may even start to get resentful. At the very least, I'm going to stop growing. So our highest performers actually suffer, and our highest performers stop performing as well. So what we get when we focus on our lowest performers, although we think we need to, because we've got to fix what's broken, right? But what we get is we get higher low performers, lower high performers. And if you kind of picture what that looks like, you wind up with something I call polished mediocrity. And mediocrity is a recipe for not getting much sleep. Mediocrity is a recipe for your company not growing. And, at worst, mediocrity is a recipe for your company not existing a year or two or three from now. So I think that is the biggest mistake I see leaders make, is not over investing in their highest performers. And related to that, sometimes the biggest thing standing in the way of your highest performing folks are a bunch of low performing folks running around. And one of the biggest frustrations I have when I work with leaders is very often their reluctance to make the hard decision on low performing individuals. I've had people keep folks that are toxic to their organization for not just months or quarters, but years. And they say to me, Mike, you don't understand. It's complicated. Yeah, I get it's complicated. It's always complicated. These are human beings. But are you willing to hurt the entire organization? And by the way, here's what a lot of leaders miss about their lowest performing folks. We think we're hurting them by firing them, or I call it coaching them out of the organization. But here's a little secret most people don't realize. I believe everyone has the ability to be a superstar somewhere. That somewhere may not be in the role they're playing for your organization. It may not even be in your organization. By you keeping people that are underperforming or aren't a fit for your culture, you're hurting their ability to go somewhere else where they can thrive, a different environment, a different role that better leverages their strengths.
So you raise a lot of interesting things. I guess thinking about it from the leader's perspective, when you assess your team's strengths and their weaknesses, and like to your point, when do you invest in the higher performers versus low? What do you think is the obstacle? Do you think the leaders know what they're looking for? So let's talk about your book, right? The Strength of Talent, right? So key word there is, in my opinion, is assessing that strength. right, of your existing talent. And you've developed something in your book called the talent density system. Maybe just kind of walk us through at a high level, how do you
Yeah.
assess that talent?
Yeah, so there are 5 steps in this talent density system that I've built. The first one is setting expectations. And as simple as that sounds, it's way more complicated than it sounds. When I say expectations, there are 2 types of expectations or 2 components of performance that we need to set expectations about. One is productivity. Productivity is not how long and hard somebody is working. Productivity is about achieving results. And again, although that sounds like, well, of course, Mike, I remember when COVID hit and all of a sudden we had to start going on Zoom all the time and people were working remotely for the first time. I had leaders say to me, Mike, you know, it's really hard for me to manage people remotely. And I'm like, well, okay, what's the challenge for you? I get it. This is a new thing. What's the challenge? Well, how do I know how productive they are if they're not in the office? So you have to look at what they're doing to know they're productive. It's crazy, but we all did that. If we see someone getting in early, leaving late, working really hard, we believe they're productive. They may be working that hard because they're not productive. We need to set expectations around what success in their role looks like. What are those key performance indicators? And when I sit down with leaders, I was in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin last month, and I had 100 executives in the audience. And I asked them to write down the names of all of their direct reports and what their productivity expectations were. How did they measure productivity? How often did they measure it? And kind of what was not only the metric, but the target. So if it was, and as an example, if it was someone who headed up marketing, one of the measures might have been, 10 marketing qualified leads per month. So I'm like, just write those out for each of your direct reports. What are the 2 to 3 measures of success? And the interesting thing is the only thing they did a really good job of was writing down a list of their direct reports. After they did that, for each direct report, writing down what their productivity expectation was, most of them drew a blank. Most of them struggled with it or they came up with it on the spot. And I'm like, if you're struggling with it or you're coming up with it on the spot, that means your people have no clue what productivity looks like. So when it comes for, yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Sorry, because it's interesting. Most of your clients, do they have written job descriptions and goals and like written, where expectations to me are goals, right? Hey, whatever position you have, whatever industry you're in, pretty clear as a manager, you could set some goals and say, here's how I'm going to judge you or assess you a year from now, is if you achieve these goals. Do you think most people have them written down, or in your experience, they're not written down?
A lot of them have stuff written down, but frankly, it's crap. What they have written down is a typical job description, which they wrote when they were trying to fill the job. And it says, 3 to 5 years experience in the industry, and they've got to be a college graduate, and they need to know PowerPoint and wah, 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 wah. And then they've got 10 different roles and responsibilities, which they haven't updated since they hired the person 5 years ago. But there are no measures. I have my clients, and I talk about it in the book, create something called a job scorecard. A job scorecard is kind of like a job description on steroids. It's for a role. What is the mission of that role? So let's say we're talking, I'll use marketing again as an example. We're talking about a VP of marketing position. The mission might be to, maximize the number of qualified leads we can put in front of the sales team. That might be the mission. Then what are the roles and responsibilities? That's the part that kind of still looks like a traditional job description. What are the competencies required for the job, including core values that people need to be living, which is the other part of expectations I haven't talked about yet. But then the last part, and I believe the most important part, Tony, is the part that's missing, which is what are the measurable outcomes of the role? That's the part that's missing. And it's not only missing from the document, it's missing from leaders' thought process. They're not even thinking about that stuff. And when people set goals, they set goals that are either very fuzzy. We need to, we need to, and again, I'll keep using marketing. We need to, this year, we really need to focus on improving the number of leads we have coming in. Okay.
Oh,
From what to what?
right. Do you see that there's a difference between small companies and large companies? Is it harder the bigger your company is and the more reports you have, and or is it easier as a small company where you could do all these things?
I think it's hard either way. It's a different type of hard. For a small company, what's hard is it's hard getting started. Because I have a lot of leaders that, like Mike, I agree, we need KPIs. We've got to measure this better. And 6 months later, they're still saying, "I agree, we've got to measure this better, but we're not quite sure what to measure yet. We haven't figured it out. We're working on that." Or we've got measures, but we don't track them real well. We're waiting till this magic day when our ERP is finally implemented and we'll be able to better track our numbers. We have numbers, but we don't have it on a nice dashboard yet. And for those folks, and I'll talk about the bigger companies too, Tony, but for those folks, you know, the CEO is the bottleneck there. And very often I have to say to the CEO, look, I would rather you come into your weekly accountability meetings, and notice I don't call them weekly status meetings. Yeah, I have my clients put in place something called a weekly accountability meeting, where they're holding each other accountable for a number of things, including these KPIs. I'm like, look, if people need to come to your weekly accountability meeting with the KPIs written in crayon on the back of a napkin, do that. Because if you wait until they're perfect, you're going to be waiting forever. So the smaller companies have trouble getting started. The challenge with the bigger companies is life gets more complex. As you get bigger, as you grow, that's great, but life gets more complex. And that complexity leads to, the KPIs that may have been the right KPIs 6 months ago are not the right KPIs anymore. And keeping that fresh and keeping those to the right KPIs becomes a bigger challenge for the bigger, more complex companies. And that's not to mention, the other really important part of expectations. Productivity is only one piece of it. The other piece of it that I believe is actually more important are expectations around culture fit. Now, for anybody, on this call, that if you have a set of non-negotiable core values that are documented and communicated throughout your organization, then culture fit might mean, people living and breathing those core values. If you don't have core values, and by the way, I think every company has core values. It's just whether you state them or not, or whether you're proactive about them or not. But if you don't have documented core values, a way to think about culture fit is this person making the people around them better or worse? And that's super important. Performance is not just about productivity. You could have someone who is super productive, your best salesperson, but they might be toxic to your organization. They may be really hurting the productivity of the people around them. And that's a killer if all you're doing is looking at productivity. So you have to look at both of those components.
And so, how much value do you put into self-assessment, where employees assess their own talent or their own strength, their own performance, and then how do you, as a leader or a manager, use that? I mean, is that a good thing to do? To
Yeah,
have
I think it's a good
self-assessment?
thing. I think it's a good thing to do, but the challenge with it is most do that, aligned with their annual performance review schedule or their quarterly performance review schedule. They say, "Hey, I'm going to review you, but I want you to come in with a self review." And maybe there's some form they use for that. Hey, if you're going to do annual performance reviews or quarterly performance reviews, is that a good thing to do? Sure. But again, I don't like that whole idea of annual quarterly performance reviews. One of the things I talk about in my book is a very specific framework for weekly one-on-one meetings with each of your direct reports. Now, those don't have to be long meetings. They don't even have to be very formal meetings. They're typically 30 minutes. And I have my leaders alternate, I talk about in the book, alternate between two different types of one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. One type of meeting is called the accountability and feedback meeting. And that's where, as the leader, that's your agenda. And you're holding people accountable, you're giving them feedback. It may also be where you hear back from them. How do they think they're doing? And then the second type of meeting, which again, you're alternating, so maybe odd weeks and even weeks, is called the coaching meeting. That's where the agenda is not the leader, it's the direct report. And they're coming in and saying, hey, here's where I need some help. Here's a question I have. Here's where I'm challenged. Here's an opportunity that I have that I want to move faster on. And as a leader, it's your job to coach them. So to your question, Tony, of the self-assessment, I love a self-assessment. But I just want those conversations to be ongoing conversations, not once a year or once a quarter.
You're saying that they should be weekly in the book.
Well, not necessarily a self-assessment
No,
weekly,
I meant
but weekly
review
weekly
performance.
conversations. And that weekly one-on-one done right gets rid of the need to have some magical annual performance review.
So, how do you hold your leaders accountable for growing their people?
So two key ways, and this is there are two key ways to do it, but the whole concept of holding leaders accountable is an interesting one. It's very popular to say, well, my team is accountable for their own development. You have to be accountable for your own career. And that's very true. And Tony, I'm going to be talking to a young professionals group on Thursday. And I think an important message for young professionals is they have to own their career and focus on what they can control. But what you said is important when I talk about with my leaders is leaders also have to be held accountable for developing their people. As I said earlier, the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. That means as leaders, our number one priority needs to be developing our people. And again, we all like to say people are our greatest asset. But how could you say people are your greatest asset when you're doing an annual performance review? And when you're not focusing on coaching and developing your people. Most leaders I start working with have no idea the difference between coaching, development, managing, holding people accountable, giving advice. Those are all different things. So as leaders, we need to get better coaches. So back to your questions, a question on how do we hold our leaders accountable for improving strength of talent in the organization. Number one, I do something, and this is going to sound exactly like what I said not to do, but I'll explain it, is with my leaders, I put something in place called the quarterly talent assessment meeting. That is not sitting down with your people and doing a quarterly performance review. That is the leadership team. And I start with the leadership team and then we cascade down. As a leadership team on a quarterly basis, they discuss and assess the performance of all of their direct reports. Not so they can go back and tell people, give people some ranking on their assessment. They assess so that leaders hold each other accountable for that assessment. They assess productivity and they assess culture fit. How do they hold people accountable? I had a leadership team where the company had missed their sales targets 5 quarters in a row. The VP of sales believed that all of his that not all, 80% of his sales team were performing at a high level. That math doesn't work. How could 80% of your sales team be performing at a high level and we're missing our sales targets? So leaders hold each other accountable. Wait a minute, you just gave this guy a score of 9 out of 10 on culture fit. I saw him cursing out the accounts payable team again this morning. Like what? How could you say that he's a high culture fit? So in that quarterly talent assessment meeting, they're assessing performance together, holding each other accountable. They are also together coming up with actions. What actions should they be taking to better challenge and develop and re-recruit and do career planning and reward their highest performing folks? What are they doing to take their medium performers and turn them into top performers or change their role? What are they doing to coach their lowest performers or make the difficult decisions? They're challenging each other as leaders to come up with the right actions. So this quarterly talent assessment meeting is kind of the truth serum of this. It's not, we're going to do a bunch of this stuff and send it into HR. And in my book, there is a very specific blueprint and system for how you're assessing performance in different categories and prescribed actions. But so that meeting is one piece. The other piece, which is really almost the secret sauce of this whole process, is I've came up with this measure called the TDI, the talent density indicator. I'll say for the third time, overall theme of the book is the number one driver of profit growth is people growth. There's a problem with that statement. We've all heard the cliche, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And it's a cliche because it's mostly true. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth. Do we measure profit growth? What do you think? Yes or no? Of course we do. When I sit with leadership teams or when I sit with groups, I do workshops with groups of CEOs very often. I go around a group of 18 CEOs. They could all tell me down to the 10th of a percent how they're doing on profit growth year to date and to plan. No problem. But then I say, how are you doing on people growth? And I get answers like, pretty good. Pretty good is not a measure. We need a measure. So in my talent density system, again, there is this quarterly talent assessment and this way of measuring performance and coming up with who your high performing folks are, who are your medium performing folks, who are your low producing folks, who are your low culture fit folks. There's these different categories. And then the TDI, the talent density indicator, very simply is the percent of your folks that are high performing minus the percent that are low performing. That number is going to give you a percent anywhere from negative 100% to positive 100%. If all your folks are low performing, you've got zero high performing minus 100% low performing, that's negative 100%. If they're all high performing, it's positive 100%. If they're all medium performing, it's zero. That number becomes a benchmark you could use for the company, a benchmark you could use for each leader. I believe that the KPIs, Tony, we talked about earlier, the productivity measures of success, one of those targets, an expectation for a leader is they ought to be quarter in and quarter out improving their talent density indicator.
Yeah.
Because you can take a lot of action and say, I'm coaching these people, I created a training program, I did all this stuff. But if you are not increasing the percent of your folks that are high performing and decreasing the percent that are low performing, something's not working. So we need to hold leaders accountable for improving the talent density indicator.
No, this is all good. And just for the group, I mean, if anybody has a question, just jump in, unmute yourself or put it in the chat box. But I think, Mike, everything you've been saying is great. I think the challenge for a lot of managers, leaders is when you say investment, it's time, it's resources, it's training, for the lower performing people, it's really that challenge, right? How much, I'll share with you anecdotally what members have told me since COVID with the younger workforce coming in. Right. And this is like all sectors, right? This one happened to be from the accounting sector, where he said to me, the expectation is our younger people aren't going to stay with the firm that long. So we got to make a managerial decision how much time and effort to invest in that person, because a year from now, that person could be gone. And that kind of struck me in that they're actually thinking like that now. When I was growing up, the goal was to always work for one or two companies. Now it seems like if you only work for one or two companies, it's actually seen as a detriment, jumping around, if you will, is probably better on a resume. So that kind of struck me that, a lot of our members are literally making those kind of decisions to say, is this person, he or she, is somebody we want to keep? Do we want to invest in them? Why? And it's a challenge, really, to make that decision to say, we've already invested a lot of time and we just don't see that strength growing. We don't
Yeah.
see that
So
talent. So
So a few things there, and there's so much to unpack there. But I'm going to steal a quote. I think I'm stealing it from Bill Gates, although if it's not Bill Gates, I'm stealing it from somebody. And the quote was, so it started with the question, what if we invest in this person and they leave? And then the answer was, what if we don't invest in them and they stay?
go on.
Like we need to invest in our people, right? And then there's some, yeah, let's talk about some of the math here, right? So one thing, so right in Paramus, we've got the Container Store. We've all heard of the Container Store. It's a gentleman who founded the Container Store named Kip Tyndall, who was the founder and he was CEO for many years. And he had this great philosophy of people. He called one equals three. One equals three says one superstar performer equals the productivity of three mediocre performers. And we've all seen that, right? In fact, there are certain roles within an organization where I think it's one equals five or one equals 10. I've seen great salespeople be 5x a mediocre salesperson. Great software engineers be 10x mediocre software engineers. Great senior leaders be 5 or 10x a mediocre leader because a mediocre leader is going to cascade down mediocrity throughout the organization. So one equals three actually says we can pay our superstars double or double our investment in them is another way to think of it. And we're still getting a greater return on investment than a bunch of mediocre people. Boston Consulting Group did a study and found that companies that were what they called talent magnets, and talent magnets meant they were rated high in 20 different leadership and talent development categories. Companies that were talent magnets grew their revenue 2.2 times faster and their profits 1.5 times faster than the talent laggards, the companies that didn't invest as much in leadership and talent development. The return on investment is there to make that investment and putting the investment aside for a second or putting the return on investment aside for a second. I think as leaders it's also about our sanity, right? I mean, think about if you have a team around you that is just challenging you to be your best every day in a good way. A team around you where your biggest challenge is how high to raise the bar. A team around you that could do a great job without you having to be there to look over their shoulder. Like, man, that feels good. That's just you sleep well at night. You can go on vacation and the team, the company actually gets better without you because you're not bothering people as opposed to feeling like you've got to grip that team and the company tight every day, being overwhelmed by everything you've got to do because at the end of the day, who else is going to do it? Like it's an investment in our sanity. And I've seen too many leaders, in my 35 years of doing this, I've seen too many leaders and too many business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs fall out of love with their business because of all the crap they've got to deal with every day. And when you're investing and you've got a great team around you, that's the first step in falling back in love with your business.
Good stuff. We have about 10, 15 minutes left. Anybody have any questions for Mike before we keep going?
Is a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry about that.
I see one from Sarah. What are your thoughts on managing low performing employees who are family members of a family company? Oh,
Yikes. Question.
Sarah, you probably need a drink more than anything else, and it's early in the morning. That's really tough. Family businesses are tough because when I said before, a lot of times the reaction I get when you've got someone who's toxic to the organization, or maybe they're not toxic, but their productivity is very low, and someone says it's complicated, and I say, well, why is it complicated? Because it's hard to fire Uncle Joe. You know, that's really tough. But, what I found is, number one, if if the company is important to you, if your team is important to you, sometimes, we've got to put our big boy pants on or a big girl pants on and make the really tough decision. And there are also creative ways to deal with it. I'll tell you a story from a family business I worked with about 15 years ago. Is I worked with the CEO and the leadership team. The CEO was great guy in his mid 40s, third generation business. Dad, who was in his late 60s, was quote unquote retired, living in Florida, lobbing bombs in every chance he got, not because he wanted to hurt anybody. Dad was just trying to help, but was really wreaking havoc within the organization. And, every time I talked to the son would do nothing but complain about the dad. And at first I thought he's got to be exaggerating. Until one day I left the office after I think my third coaching discussion with this leader, and I thought I've got to find a way from stop hyper focusing on dad. And I left the building, and I got a phone call with a 954 area code, which is Florida. And I'm like, I don't, who's calling me from Florida? And I answer the phone, and it's, I understand you're working with my son. I said, oh yeah, it's good to meet you. I'm working with my son. He goes, do you mind if I give you some advice on working with him? And I said, sure. And he goes, he's late for meetings. He's unprofessional. He's overweight. He has no follow through. He's not very good at selling. He's undisciplined. He went for 2 minutes without taking a breath and just insulted his son every way possible. And I just said, thank you very much, and ended the call. Of course, I did not tell the son about that conversation. But even in that extreme situation, what we wound up doing is I said to the son, I said, look, I said, your dad he's so used to being involved in the business. He just wants to help. He's not trying to be a bad guy. What do you think your dad does best that might help the organization? And he said, my father is like the mayor of the industry. Like, he knows everybody in the industry. Him out there being the ambassador to the industry is great. He's also still kind of the mayor internally. People love my dad around here. So what we did is we wound up creating a role for his dad. We changed his role. And the role was, you're going to be the company ambassador. And here's what we need. The son had a conversation with that dad, not saying, Dad, I need you out of my hair, so go do this other stuff. Saying, Dad, you know everybody in this industry way more than I do. You are so good with everybody. Where I really need your help is to go be our ambassador and get back to going to those industry conferences again. And I really need you to, talk to these vendors, and every once in a while I'd love you to walk through, our offices and just say hi to folks and see how they're doing. And the dad loved that. And the dad was so thankful that he could be helpful, that it, number one, added a ton of value. His dad really was valuable there. It wasn't just go play with this toy. His dad added a lot of value, and it was like a breath of fresh air to the leadership team that didn't have to deal with dad lobbing bombs in, every other day. So sometimes it is about making the tough decision, even if it is Uncle Joe. And other times it's about, wait a minute, can we find a role that could better leverage this person's strengths, better leverage what they're great at, and use them in that way? But there's no doubt, Sarah, when this, for a family business, there is another layer of challenge on top of all of this.
Good question, Sarah. Other questions, thoughts for Mike?
I have a question. Hi, Mike. I'm just curious about the weekly accountability piece. We're an engineering consulting firm, so we know how to measure our metrics. It's utilization, how many hours we can bill to a client. We have those lists like weekly. I get report weekly, but I feel like it's a big confidence buster to sort of harp on that on a weekly basis. I don't think it's productive for the staff. Not everybody has a 100% week every week. So I'm just curious how that fits into your whole plan.
The way it fits in, and it's not just KPIs, in a weekly accountability meeting, there are a number of things that happen. Number one, each leader, and when I talk about, I'm talking about the senior leadership team, not, not everybody in the organization initially anyway, is for the senior leadership team, everybody's got a quarterly priority. I call them rocks, a quarterly priority that they're accountable for. And the way I suggest you think about a rock or a quarterly priority is it's something they're doing to work on the business. So if I am heading up HR, then, my quarterly rock is not about, hiring the people I need to hire or, making sure that, everybody signs up for, benefits in the right way. That's working in the business. That's part of what I do every day. I may have KPIs that measure that, but my working on the business may be, hey, we need to implement a brand new methodology for recruiting, evaluating, and hiring people, or we need to upgrade our onboarding process, right? So each leader has something they're doing to work on the business. In the weekly accountability meeting, they're held accountable for whatever plan they committed to make that happen. Are they on track? Are they red, yellow, or green on that? Same thing with KPIs. There's also something I call who, what, whens, which is typically more tactical tasks that people commit to do. And you're not going through and say, how you doing with this? How you doing with this? How you doing with this? Not only does that feel like an interrogation, not only is that a waste of time, but what we want to do is manage by exception. So I have, each of my client has a tool they're using where they can actually throw up, on the screen, all of the KPIs, all of the rocks, those who, what, whens, and who's in the red, who's in the yellow, and who's in the green. And if you're in the green, if you're succeeding, great. Mindy, I see you're in the green, on your rock to upgrade our onboarding process. Great job. Anything we need to talk about? No, good, great. Taurine, I see you're in the yellow with this priority you're working on. What's going on there? What's your plan to get back on track? And what help do you need from us? Right? So we're managing it by exception. And no, not everybody is expected to be at 100% all the time. Absolutely right. But here's the thing I coach my CEOs to hold their leaders accountable for. If Tony comes into a meeting and he's in the red on one of his KPIs or one of his quarterly priorities, and I say, Tony, what's going on? I see you're in the red. What's your plan to get back on track? And Tony says, I've been real busy, not sure, haven't figured that out. I'm working on it and I'll get back to you. That's not acceptable. What is acceptable is Tony saying one of two things: either thought a lot about this, I'm working on it, I've worked on it, here's my plan, and here's the help I need from all of you. That's acceptable. He could be in the red as long as he's trying to get back on track and he's telling us what he's going to do and what help he needs. It's also acceptable to say, hey, I've thought about this, I've thought about this, I've thought about this. I'm really struggling. I'm kind of at a loss. I need some help from the group. That's acceptable. We're not expected as leaders to know all the answers, but we need to hold everybody accountable for doing their best to honor their commitments week in and week out. And one of the things I do with all my clients is we do these quarterly planning sessions, and the weekly accountability meeting becomes the seed where true accountability either grows and thrives, or if they don't have the weekly accountability meeting or they don't facilitate it right, accountability kind of slowly or pretty quickly dies.
Excellent. We have about 5 minutes. Mike, did you want to show your slide?
Oh
or-
yeah. So first in the chat, if you look at the chat, there's a link to buy The Strength of Talent. There's also a link. I'm having a launch event at the Barnes and Noble in Paramus tomorrow night at 6:30. Short event, 45 minutes to an hour. Would love for some of you to be there. I'll be doing a little bit of speaking, doing a Q&A and a discussion and a book signing. But here is a QR code that if it's easier for you to than to click the link on the chat, or if you don't see it in the chat, there's a QR code to buy the book.
Yeah, always good information, Mike, that you provide our members. And I'm happy to say I'm looking forward to on Thursday. Mike is going to help facilitate our discussion with our young professionals at Loopwell. So any closing comments, Mike? I mean, it's never easy to assess the strength of your talent, but I think it's necessary, right? To your point, if you want to continue to grow and grow your profits, grow the company, I think you have to measure it. And
You do, and I guess the final thing I'd want to leave everybody with is, as a leader, your number one priority, I believe, needs to be growing the people on your team, coaching them, developing them, challenging them, making the difficult decisions. And when push comes to shove, when economy is bad, when business is bad, when something throws us for a loop, the investment in our people tends to be one of the first things we toss out the window. And that needs to be the thing that stays. If great strategies with the wrong team will fail every single time. But a mediocre strategy with the right people, those right people will find a way to succeed. So it's all about prioritizing people growth.
excellent. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all for joining us today. And we're going to broadcast this out to our members on Friday. But good luck with the book signing tomorrow, Mike, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony, and everybody at Commerce for doing this. Thank all of you for your
Thank you, Mike.
support. And I hope to see some of you at Barnes & Noble tomorrow night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.